that's why we celebrate the final girl. That's the hero because that person made it. They beat the evil. They won the day.
Hello, boils and ghouls. It's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to welcome my good fiends of the Horror Heals podcast. Is horror good for mental wellness? But of course it is. I delight in the delicious deaths of pitiful people on the silver screen. So get ready for a hell of a good time with my new fiends, Corey and Kendall, on the Horror Heals podcast.
Welcome back to the Horror Heals podcast, our groovy ghoulies. It's Kendall, one of your two co-hosts. This is part 2 of co-host Corey's conversation with Andre Gower. If you tuned in last episode, and if you didn't, why the hell not, you heard Corey chat up Andre about his experiences with the Monster Squad and how horror movies can serve as powerful tools for healing. In today's episode, we carve deeper into the profound ways horror connects people, including those on the autism spectrum, and how shared experiences at horror conventions help foster that sense of belonging. Trust me, this episode will give you a whole new perspective on the power of horror and its community.
I'm glad that you mentioned Monster Mania because that's really where the inspiration for this podcast came from. Kendall had been pestering me. He wants to do a horror podcast, and we've already got our other family podcast that we do. What's our niche? So I'm at Monster Mania in March and standing in line to meet Sam Raimi. And there's this kid in the next aisle next to me. You know how they pack you in like sardines there, and he's holding his stack of Sam Raimi movies. Very clearly uncomfortable, kind of like talking to himself a little bit, like walking back and forth to the point where I was about to ask the people in front and behind, like, hey, do you mind if he steps out until it's his turn? And then he can go up and meet Sam. He's clearly very uncomfortable. But before I could do that, the person next to him said, oh man, The Gift. I love that movie. And all of a sudden, like, any worry that this kid had just washed away.
Right.
Immediately, because he had a friend and they were chatting it up. And I was like, okay, that's it. Horror heals.
Now, do you think this kid was just young and nervous, or do you think he was a little bit?
I think he might have been on the spectrum.
Right?
I was just gonna say, we see that a lot. I think we see a lot of fans at the cons that are probably on the spectrum, and I think that it's healing for them. The experience. I mean, people that normally probably couldn't be in an environment like that with so many people, but they're willing to do that because it's a family reunion. Dave puts on a family reunion several times a year.
I'm on the other side of the table and I meet those kids, or I meet those adults, and you can kind of, you meet and kind of ascertain and quickly assess who's in front of you. And I think there is a large number of, horror fans that are, somewhere, well, according to, like, we're all on at least one part of the poll there, but I think it's an interesting thing that whether you're, have a little bit of Asperger's, or whether you are autistic on some range, or even Downs. Like, we have a lot of Downs fans that are just, they're like, we love Monster Squad. We're like, that's awesome. And what it is they're connecting with something. And I go back to the thing with connecting, because that's what we really learned about Monster Squad. We just didn't realize, like, why or how or what the phenomenon was. And we realized that when people watch the Monster Squad in particular, they really connected with something. And it never left. And it stayed with them either their whole life and became something that was an anchor, in their life. And they can always fall back on that. You're climbing up an ice wall and you got or a rock wall and you got a piton. And, if your other one coming, you can always go back down to that anchor piton and go a different route. Or if this one falls out, this one will catch you. And I think people use their horror films and their horror stories and their fandom as their kind of like anchor piton. And that's their connection with the world. And a piton is a connection with the earth. But so it's a good metaphor there. But we see that a lot. And I could probably, I wish I remember all their names, but, probably at least a few dozen. But there's at least 8 or 10 amazing stories that I've had parents come up to me and say, "Hey, I'm a big fan." I'm like, "Oh, thanks, because that's what you're here for. You're at a screening." And that's what I think he goes, "But let me explain about my son. My son is 7, 8, 10 years old, whatever, severely autistic. And every day for us, I remember this one story. It was at South Lamar Alamo Draft House, and I hung out with this guy, all weekend, and it was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And he told me this story about his son. He goes, "I've always been a horror fan. Monster Squad's my favorite movie, and this is great that you're here. But my life really is tough because our son is severely mentally disabled. 22 hours of every day is an absolute nightmare for my wife and I." And I was like, "Man, I'm really sorry about that. That's really unfortunate." And he goes, I've always been a horror fan, so I have to go off to my own time and I watch my horror movies, and I usually watch Monster Squad. Because when if you've ever taken care of someone that's either injured or dying or infirm or whatever, it wears on you. It really does. I had that experience with my dad. And you think you can handle it. You get to a point where like, I just can't, I just crack. You wear down. And I can't imagine doing this with your own child for so long when it's really, really a bad situation. And he goes, "So I have to go in my room and shut the door and I watch my movies, and I usually watch Monster Squad." And one day I was in there because my son was having a really, really hard day, and I had to take my time out. The father had to take a time out. And he goes, and I had Monster Squad on, and he was just throwing a fit. And so I had to go in my, room and watch it. And I realized the fit had stopped, and I turned around and my son was standing behind the couch watching Monster Squad. Silent. And he goes, "My son is never silent." And I was like, "Whoa." And he goes, and then he came around and watched the movie. And now that's his settling thing, is to watch your movie. And I was like, I don't know how to respond to that, because I thought this was your story, because you said this was your timeout and you're kind of like recentering for yourself to take care. He goes, "But now," he goes, "my son," and I was like, okay, this is almost the first kind of experience I had with a story like that. And then I've had, a dozen more, but I was like, what do you think is it? Is it the sounds? Is it the colors? Does he get what's going on in the movie? He goes, "I don't know, and I don't care." He goes, "There's something about it that he is connected, and that gives me an hour and a half. That gives me and my wife an hour and a half break, and he's enjoying it because you can tell. But we're also getting a downtime." So it was dope. I was like, what are you going to do with it? I was fresh and dealing with something. I was like, it's still fascinating to me. And then I heard a dozen more stories exactly like that. I wonder if it's the scariness, if it's the adventure, and I think everybody's different and with their reaction to it. But for some reason, I know Monster Squad, because I can talk about that as an expert, has that effect on a certain group of people, and it's fascinating to me. I'd love to dive into the biology and the psychology of that, but I think as a whole, I think that also works as well. Horror movies are also, that was a very niche type of thing, but talking about horror movies and healing, I think horror movies are an escape for a lot of people, a lot of fans. I'm going to escape. Some people, it's sci-fi movies, or going off in space, or like going off on an interdimensional adventure. Horror movies, for some, that's their escape, and that's their safe space. That's their comfort zone. People's comfort zone is being an axe murderer running around killing an entire town, or a monster coming and fire breathing everybody. That's someone's comfort zone. And I think there's a wide range of explanations for them. There's a wide range of experiences. But it's got to be something about the archetypes of it. It's got to be something about the shared scary experience that you make it out of. That's why we celebrate the final girl. That's the hero, because that person made it. They beat the evil. They won the day. Every movie has a hero, whether it's Rudy Rudiger or Heather Langenkamp. Everybody's got your hero at the end, and it's just a different journey. But when it's a final girl, it's like, yeah, that's Sydney. Like Sydney made it. It really wasn't a monster. It was just assholes. Like, but sometimes, and you're just like, okay. But we celebrate that because we all hope we would be that person. We all hope, if we were ever in a real life situation like that, that we would be able to step up and win the day and be the final girl and be the survivor. And I think what that taps into is an absolute bottom of the DNA in our brains and our existence of survival. And I think all that does is tap that on there and click that juice button to go, we celebrate the final girl, we celebrate the hero and the survivor, because we hope that if we were ever in the situation that we could do a modicum of that and make it through the other side. The reality is most people can't. And I think we all know that most of us can't, but we still watch and we celebrate because that's how we get it through. Then there's, that 1% that probably will. And I think that's just something that's just, it taps into this base biological part of, the DNA. And that's why we celebrate that, that final girl, the survivor. And because going through this totally scary thing. And I think it all kind of connects, throughout, the whole kind of framework there.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. And this is usually our final question since you brought it up. And I think I have a gut reaction as to who you're going to say, but who is your favorite final person?
Oh, because of the movie or because of the person? Like Nev Campbell's hard not to root for. Nev Campbell's, and I've met Nev Campbell like once or twice. We're not pals. I'm pals with Heather Langenkamp. So, maybe she's awesome because she kind of, I don't want to say she set the standard, but I think she set the modern modern standard maybe. I'll go with those two.
Okay. I thought you might say Nancy just because you mentioned, Freddie being the scariest. And I know Heather was in your doc and she's awesome. And she made a great documentary too.
Yeah. Who better to have, and a lot of people don't know that Heather's husband, Dave, is a special effects makeup who actually worked on Monster Squad.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so cool. It's a good little tidbit of trivia for you. But yeah, I think in the I guess I'm saying the modern era, and Heather and I are getting up there. But look, there's great survivors, even from the 50s and 60s and things like that. But I think in the modern era, with what we actually coined the final gal or the survivor, yeah, I think Nancy and Sydney are probably, you can't make a top 3 list without them being on it.
It's funny because our paths have not crossed before. I mean, I'm a big horror con guy, but we just haven't been at the same one for whatever reason. But I've got a pretty good instinct about people, and that's why I reached out to you, because I thought that you were going to have some really good insight into this topic.
Hopefully my rambling made a little sense.
You've been great. I'm curious what that first con was like after your heart attack and you got back out there to meet the people.
Oh, man, I got to think of which one it was. Holy moly. Interestingly enough, the first con, I had a batch coming up in October. I think we had like 3 things in a row that October. I had the heart attack in July. I kind of laid low for about month and a half to almost 2 months. And then I literally went on the road. I was not at home for like 7 weeks. And one of the first place I actually went, I went and helped manage the Ryder Cup in Wisconsin that year. And I probably worked a little too hard as somebody who just had a massive heart attack. But shortly after that, Ryan and I went to Manchester, England to do For the Love of Horror. And it was not the first time we'd been in the UK, but the first time after the heart attack and the first time for this convention. And it was awesome. And then shortly after that, we were there. We were right back at Monster Mania. But he had moved to the location, and it happened to be up in King of Prussia that year. It was still great, but it was kind of COVID-y, and like people were keeping distance, and it was in this giant space, even with the same amount of people, and it looked small, but it was still good. But I had such a response from the fan base, and I don't really call it our fan base. Ryan and I almost kind of like, you're just in the goddamn club, like all the people that are in the goddamn club. I had such this amazing kind of response that, and I tried not to kind of like overdo it. And I wasn't even really doing most of it when I was in the hospital after, but people wanted updates. And I tried not to use my kind of personal, I don't say tragedy, or personal kind of hard experience to go through to drum up, sympathy, or drum up likes, or drum up, oh, poor you. I mean, that's awful. Like the story broke not from me, like it got, and went out, and people just went, no, this can't happen. And like and it almost seems kind of, I don't want to say it's not cheap. What I'm saying, it could be taken as kind of cornballish, but they're like, yeah, we knew, this isn't going to happen. You're not going anywhere. You got to make it through because you're our leader. And I went, I'm not. I went, oh, damn it. Well, I guess I am. So I kind of, people have been saying that, for almost, a decade leading up to that kind of, and I was like, I'm now realized, I was like, you know what? Okay. I guess I am. And that's kind of cool. So with that, these club members, if I'm the leader of that, I'll take that. But I think, being around the fans and being around the there was almost a convention online, of support coming after that. But then being back face to face and like kind of, shaking hands and, taking photos with people, you were kind of right back in the world that they want you in. And I was certainly appreciative and happy that I was still around to do that. I came a few minutes away from not being able to go to a convention again. That's something that you think about. You're like, oh, that would have sucked. And if it had actually happened, if I had checked out on July 3rd of 21, I wouldn't know it anyway. So it doesn't really matter to kind of see that response and understand what you mean as a body of work and then as you mean as an individual, because a lot of these people I see more than once, or like I know who they are, or we've interacted or something like that. And there's not only just a movie connection and a fandom connection, but there's a personal connection. And I think we do a good job as a cast as a whole. And then especially Ryan Lambert and myself, because usually when I'll appear and do screen like just by myself or solo if I'm in a town or something. But Ryan and I are usually together, and Ryan and I kind of work as a duo, and we kind of engineered, I guess, either by default or by accident or with the help of someone who used to be very, very, very close to me in this during that time. That was phenomenal. She helped engineer kind of this thing. And then Ryan and I took it and we interacted with the fans in a different way than most people do. And they already have a connection to Monster Squad and the characters. And then they end up having a connection to Ryan and I or myself. And it's just something that is so tangible. You can't quantify it with how much is your autograph? You're like, that's not what this is. This is literally a tethering of people that have been weaved into this fabric of the fandom through Monster Squad. But then you have this personal connection and you meet somebody. And I don't think many of them go away not affected by it. And we certainly don't either. And because we remember people, and now I don't know if it was at that first Monster Mania or it might have been something else. We met a fan. She comes and she goes, big fan, love it. And she goes, and actually I have a new Monster Squad fan in the oven right now. So she was like 7 months pregnant or something. I'm not kidding you. Like 3 years later, she showed up at another show with I'm like, there he is. Like, we met you before you were still in the oven. And now you're out and it's bonkers to have these connections with these people that you actually either interact with every so often or regularly, and they're always on your socials. Those always celebrating. They're always saying hi. They're always giving a like to something. And then I always try to, at least on my socials, and I think it's a good thing or a bad thing that I don't have that many followers, but all of my followers are actual real humans, right? And most people are like, whoa, you have 100,000 followers. Like, yeah, 98,000 of them are not real people and you bought them. I'm pretty convinced that about 99% of mine are real and not the other way around. And, I try to interact and at least give a heart or a like if they've mentioned or send you something, or if they DM you. And it's like, you get a lot. You can't do, all the time. And that really kind of helps the connection. When you look at it, it's like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, how many people get this opportunity? The other thing is also if you ever have anything else coming out, that these are the first people that are going to be there celebrating it or shouting out of the rooftops. And I was like, yeah, why? Like, this is a no-brainer, but it's also fun. I mean, these are great people. Very, very rarely, like you were saying, in the horror community, in the horror community of fans, there's not too many assholes. Yeah, there's not too many jerks. And if there are, then it's like, it's fine. There's always an anomaly. But I think as a whole, everybody's really, really, really cares. And they're all going through something. And then, look, there have been plenty of times that because of Monster Squad or because of a screening or a document, that people have made friendships and relationships, or they have combined over the internet because of their connection either to one of us or the movie itself. So now we're just a conduit to people connecting. And to go back to, when we opened up in the first 5 minutes of our conversation, is about that shared experience over something that, the flickering light in the dark. And you can still now, because of technology, different tribes and different members of different tribes geographically can connect and talk to other tribes about that same flickering light and share your connection and share your myth, and you create your own tribes. And we've seen that nonstop since 2006. It's crazy.
No, I love it. I mean, you absolutely get it. You totally get it, and you're doing it the right way. I mean, I know I think there's a minority of the guests that are like not doing it for the right reasons, or, because you want somebody to have a good experience with you, because you don't want them to go home that day and be like, oh man, I guess they're right. Don't meet your heroes. I don't agree with that. I think that most of you guys are doing it the right way, and like, who can say that they have too many friends?
That's right. When it comes down to it, like, even if you are kind of a selfish narcissist, it's like, you're going to complain that there's like 50 people in line waiting to meet you. I was like, that would really, I think, stoke your fire of being a putz. But what's all in the same vein, that's almost kind of hard, because you're talking about people that maybe go to a convention or something and don't do it right. It happens. Why are you here? Because nobody's getting, either side of the table is getting nothing out of it, except for maybe your fee, and that's really the only reason why they're there. And what's very interesting is we understood, or we learned early, that something was there about Monster Squad fans. We didn't realize that, why this movie connected with it. We started learning about that, over some time, but it was fascinating. And then once we kind of got it and we understood it and realized that the kids that connected with Monster Squad that are now adults, or either the current kids, the new kids, there's something about it, whether it's the characters or the themes, or the the monsters or whatever, they really connect with this movie. And that's what ended up being kind of the spark of interest to make something like the documentary, is to connect, is to answer that question of why and how something like that works. Now, in that personal one-on-one situation, or you're there at a con, I always call it the Jason Nesbitt. You can't be at a convention, just be that guy and signing going next, and just like not even looking at the fans and signing it, whether you have 2 people in line or 200 people in line, which we've had. A lot of times, even if you're on someone's podcast show or doing an interview, this one's great because it's a bit different, a different conversation. But most people, if you've never done their show or done their podcast or met them at a convention, you get asked the same question a lot, or like, what was your favorite thing? Or it was like, and that's okay, because that's what this interaction is about. And if you're at the table at a convention and there's been, you got 10 people in line, let's say, and we kind of gauge, we usually do it. It's like, okay, but whether this is your 100th person that you've talked to that day, you really, if you want to do it halfway right, you've got to approach it like they're your first person that you talked to that day, and maybe the only person you talked to that day, because they may have waited in line for 20 minutes to get up to you to tell you their story and their connection and get their VHS signed, because they may be person number 100, but this is the only and first time that they've ever met you, and they're never going to get that again. They may meet you again, but it's never that first time. And you kind of, if you get that early and you can appreciate that, then you find a way to approach it and handle it well. And I think I do, and I think Ryan and I as a duo, like we're really, really good together, and like people dig coming to hang out with us, and that's why we love going to shows and going. What part of New Hampshire are you in?
So we're right on the seacoast, about right by Maine. Yeah, so. Yeah, so we moved here from the San Francisco Bay Area in 2018 because we found Kendall's birth family living out here. His dad.
That's bonkers. Yeah, what a great story. Ryan and I will be in Salem, Massachusetts, the 3rd weekend in October.
Oh, awesome!
We're doing a whole weekend of screenings and premium experience screenings and some bonker screenings. There may be some wild, wacky stuff going on, but we'll be in Salem. We'll be in Salem that weekend, so that'd be kind of rad.
Yeah, I'll definitely come down and.
Yeah, definitely. Let me know. We got to keep making movies that go in the theater, and people got to go to the theater, and it can't just be Gen X saving the theater, because we're getting old and tired. It's funny because so my niece is just getting into horror. She's going to be 16. And so that's kind of one of our bonding things. And so we watched X together, the first Ty West, flick. And then she watched Pearl before I did, and she just fell in love with Pearl. And was like, I am obsessed with this movie. Yeah, she's going to be our special Gen Z correspondent. Yes.
For this podcast.
Yes, love it. But that's what's neat about horror as a genre anyway. I mean, any genre always has new stuff, but genre, there's a lot of stuff that's evergreen or classic that'll never go out of style. But there's always something new. Because, like we were mentioning at the very, very beginning, is horror stories are just the physical manifestation of what's currently going on. That's what Frankenstein, the book, is, Mary Shelley book. That's what Dracula stories are. Everything, Creature from Black Lagoon, like all these said, these are all kind of Cold War, atomic era, mutant type, things. That's what Godzilla is. They're all a physical manifestation, representation of current society fears. And it's interesting to see what comes out now. And, whether it's, online, craziness or stalking or trolling, my good buddy and kind of development cohort in crime, Henry McComas, who was really kind of the main guy that brought you Wolfman's Got Nards, is a fantastic story developer and a fantastic writer, and he's a good director. What's interesting is if anybody likes movies with old themes in a new setting, he made his first narrative feature as writer direct that's on Tubi now, which don't discount Tubi. Tubi has more eyeballs on it than anything.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Tubi is great.
And Wolfman's actually on Tubi, so it's good. Yeah, you got to deal with ad breaks, but that's okay. But on the Tubi originals, there's not. And he made a Tubi original called The Camp Host. It really, if you watch it, it's current, but it's got old slasher themes, old bad, who the killer is right off the bat. And it's all about old themes meet new themes. And it's done really well, especially for the resources and, kind of time frame that he had to make it. And people are loving that on Tubi. And that's a perfect example of new fears, new things, and how reactionary, and what our fears of the society and culture are. That's a great movie for his first out of the gate. And I know he has 2 scripts. One he's finished, another one finished. They're just phenomenal, and hopefully I get to be a part to make those as well. So it's good.
I just saw somebody post about that in my feed, so we're gonna have to watch that one tonight. Well, Andre, I knew you were gonna be awesome, but I didn't think you were gonna be this awesome. So thank you so much. Definitely gonna come down and see you in Salem.
Please
one of
do.
our favorite places to go.
Yeah,
you'll get to meet Kendall as well, and you've been very generous with your time and your stories and insight, and it's really appreciated.
Well, I appreciate it. Hopefully it like I said, I tend to go off on tangents and ramble, but sometimes they come back and they connect, and sometimes they don't connect for a couple days. People go, "Oh, that makes sense."
You gave me lots of good stuff to work with.
Well, it's good. Awesome.
Stuff to work with.
Well, it's good. Awesome.
Stuff to work with.
Well, it's good. Awesome.
Stuff to work with.
Well, it's
Take a stab at subscribing and leaving us a review. We want to hear and share your own horror healing stories on the podcast. Email us at horrorhealspodcast@gmail.com and check out horrorheals.com for blog posts, cool artwork, and more. And remember, when someone questions, horror is good for our mental health, you can tell them, of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.